Today's episode of the Culture Study Podcast is sponsored by The 19th. I love The 19th. The 19th is an independent, nonprofit newsroom whose reporting centers those who have been traditionally shut out from politics and policy. Ahead of the election, The 19th wants to help you make sense of how people from underrepresented communities are impacted every day by U.S. politics and policy. Women's rights, reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus rights, they're all on the ballot this November. I just have to tell you, we are very picky about which publications we would choose to advertise or endorse on this podcast. Having subscribers makes that possible. And it also makes it possible that, when someone comes to us and says, how would you feel about doing an ad for a place? I can say yes, enthusiastically, the way that I did to The 19th, when it actually aligns with our values. And it actually is a publication that I have been reading for a really long time, since the beginning, since the launch. I love The 19th. I love their newsletter. I read it every morning. They are reporting on the election in a way that no other publication is, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. You can also listen to The 19th podcast wherever you're listening to this one. It's hosted by editor-at-large Erin Haynes, who's amazing. It's called The Amendment. And its goal is to shed light on our politics during this critical election year where the work of our democracy is still unfinished. So ahead of the election, subscribe to The 19th's free newsletter. Again, I love this newsletter. It's the only news newsletter that I actually consistently open. You can do that at 19thnews.org/culture study. And you spell out 19 like the number, like 19thnews.org/culture study to stay informed on the issues that represent those underserved by and underrepresented in American media. That's 19th News, 19th News, 19thnews.org/culture study. And thank you so much to The 19th for sponsoring today's episode. This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Leah Koch. I am one of the owners of the Rip Bodice Bookstore in Los Angeles, California, and Brooklyn, New York. And this is my sister,
B. Hodges Koch, and I am the other co-owner of the Rip Bodice.
We told our listeners that we were doing an episode on romance bookstores, but we were also pretty cagey about who the guest host would be. And so many people DM'd me and Melody and were like, oh, please, is it the Rip Bodice? So very exciting to have you
nice.
here today.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
We want to start, I know, right? We want to start with the backstory. So you opened the bookstore in 2016, before what is understood as the current boom in romance. What was the dream when you started out?
I think it was to make a space that we didn't see in the bookstore world, and that is a space for romance readers. It was really simple, a really simple dream. We love bookstores. Whenever we travel, we make it a point to seek out bookstores, especially independent bookstores. And we've been doing that since we were little kids. Our parents are huge bookstore nerds. And when we would go to those bookstores, we would often ask for romance. And at the time, this is very different now, but at the time, we got a lot of pushback from specifically male booksellers who were like, ugh, we don't have that. What are you talking about? That's not real books. That kind of, bear in mind, this is a long time ago.
Not that long ago.
Some time ago. As young readers, it's just so demoralizing for to go into bookstores and be told that the books you want to read are not real or important or whatever.
Yeah.
And as we grew up, we kept going to bookstores, kept realizing there were no romance bookstores. And after I went to graduate school, wrote a dissertation on romance, it just became clear that Leah and I wanted to work together. We're figuring out our next step, and our next step had something to do with bookstores and romance novels and putting it all together. And that's how the Rip Bodice came to be.
And there was a Kickstarter, right?
Yes. We raised about $90,000 on Kickstarter. We're young now, but we were 8.5 years younger when we were doing this. And we didn't have a lot of confidence that a bank was going to give us a traditional loan, given that we were trying to do something that nobody had ever done before. And so we went straight to our future customer base and basically said, if this is something you would be excited about, we'd love to send you a t-shirt in exchange for $20. And that is how we raised our funding.
How would you describe the state of romance in 2015, 2016?
Changing?
Yeah. And actually 2015 to 2016 is an actually really interesting time because, you know, we opened in March and it was like, it was going pretty good, but I think it was obviously the romance community supporting us. And then Trump got elected and like everyone in the world who didn't vote for him was like, I need comfort. I need escapism. And a lot of them came to us. So it was a very interesting transitional period.
The industry has had so many changes over the, like specifically romance in publishing and then publishing larger, and which has affected romance in any number of ways. But it's like a moment where we were seeing like subgenres in romance literally like disappear or reemerge as more popular. Like when we first started, there was a subgenre of romance called new adult. We haven't gotten a new adult title like marketed that way in years, it feels.
They just kind of got rid of it.
They just got rid of it.
What new adult was it like supposed to be like you're 20?
Yeah, it was 18 to 24.
Yeah.
Fascinating. That's just like everything in some ways.
Right.
Yeah. The interesting thing, like looking back, I feel like if you'd asked me in 2016, like what's the state of romance, I would have said, oh, it's booming. But now I'm like, oh my God, it was like not at all compared to now.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting that you position it within the realm of like seeking some sort of diversion from the news, from the rest of life. Like it's like skincare and romance novels.
100%. Like, those two things. And I feel like we saw this like boom in podcasts about those two things, like skincare and romance novels.
100%. And also I think a reclaiming of talking about both of those things in like a legitimized fashion. Like, fuck you, we're not going to like be derogatory about this anymore. Yeah.
It used to be, I'm about to say something really depressing, so I apologize. But it used to be much more like we would see huge spikes in sales and media requests after mass shooting events and other disasters. And but it was like event based, and now it's just all the time. Because it's universally acknowledged that things are bad all the time.
It's just emblematic. Like it's so it's the best stat I know to communicate the constant precarity, right?
Yeah.
Is that like we always need romance novels and skincare products. Yeah. So we have a ton of questions because we have a ton of fans of romance bookstores broadly, but also romances in the culture study community. So we're going to get started. And then for the Ask Anne Anything segment, we're going to answer a question from a fellow bookseller who wants tips on how to make recommendations, and then one from a librarian who wants help navigating tweens and teens' interest in the genre. So does that sound good?
Sounds amazing.
Okay, so let's start with this question from Tessa to position us even more in this current moment in romance.
I grew up reading romance novels disguised as historical westerns, and later Harlequin romance novels. In recent years, it seems like romance novels have gained legitimacy, including the popularity boom of quote-unquote better writing. Do you think that's true? And if so, why? And also, am I wrong to feel sort of possessive of the genre as an OG romance reader?
Okay, who wants to take this one? It's juicy.
You want me to?
Sure, yeah. And maybe like define a couple terms for people, like what series romance is and what Harlequin is.
Sure. Okay, so like Harlequin romance was this behemoth, and they're still publishing romance, but so many people who have been reading romance for a longer time or older romance readers got started with Harlequin, which used to be a subscription-based romance service. You could also buy them in grocery stores, in big box stores. They were just much more accessible. And they were published as category.
Subscribe.
you can still subscribe as categories or series romances. They're shorter. They're very tropey. They're a very specific kind of romance. To be totally honest, we don't sell that many in our bookstores, except for old used ones. I do not think anyone should feel bad about feeling defensive of romance, especially if you're a longtime reader. It's like, we've been here all along. What do you guys, So I totally get that feeling.
Feel however you want to feel.
Yeah. But we always like to say there's room for everyone in romance. There is a romance for everyone. And there's room for all kinds of readers. There's room for new people. There's room for people who've been here forever. And what we also like to say is everyone wants to talk about romance in their own language. So there's a big divide in the community about words like smut and bodice rippers. Like, these phrases have had pejorative connotations. Leah and I are very much of the like, let's reclaim it. We're not embarrassed. This is our world. We want to refer to it however we want. There's other people who think it devalues it. And I think all of that is valid and true and can all exist in the same world. About better writing, I don't personally think that's true. I think romance have been very well written for as long as I've been reading them. They're being taken more seriously by the literary establishment. And so there does seem to be this emphasis on whether or not they're well written, as if some of them are very poorly written, which I do find pejorative. So that's not my favorite way to describe a romance, but it certainly does happen that we describe them that way.
Yeah. Leah, what do you think?
That was a really good answer. Good job, B. The only thing I'll add when it comes to writing is I think there's this sort of weird desire to have a lot of like absolutism in romance. Like, they're all fantastic or they're all terrible. It's like, it's a huge genre of books. There are bad romance novels and there are great romance novels. Like,
what's bad to some people is good. People are looking for different things in romance novels. Like, Chuck Tingle is a perfect example of like, what is well written, what is fun, what is what people are looking for and enjoying. Like,
yeah, and sometimes it's different moments in your life. You're like, sometimes I want this kind of book, and sometimes I want a book that I'm going to forget as soon as I finish it.
Sure.
Right?
Sometimes, you just want a couple hours of like escapism and disappearing into a world, and you don't want to have to think about these characters for a long time after, and you just know they're happy. It's great.
Yeah, people aren't like, oh, it's like I think sometimes people think that reading can't be similar to, say, watching TV or scrolling TikTok, right? That like sometimes you just want to engage with a medium and an experience, and in this case, it's reading, right? And sometimes it can be spectacular, and you never forget that book, and sometimes it's just sitting down and spending 2 hours.
And there are plenty of romance novels that are spectacular books and that will stay with you for a long time, and the characters will stay with you for a long time. I think it's exactly what Leah's saying. Like, the genre definitely contains multitudes. I am a huge sitcom fan. I love sitcoms. They give me the same thing that romance novels give me. There is a preparation of expectations.
Yeah.
I know what I'm getting because it's a sitcom. I know what I'm getting because it's a romance novel. There are certain rules and conventions to a genre-based entertainment form. I love cozy mysteries. Like, I love genre in all facets. And I think all of them give us something different.
Yes. Okay, so our next question is about physical changes in the genre. I'm so excited to talk about this. This is from Jennifer.
What happened to the mass market paperback? I want to support my favorite authors, but I miss those $7.99 books. I feel like this shift coincided with illustrated covers as well, and I also miss my old school sexy covers.
Okay, so first of all, I think we can maybe talk about if these covers have actually gone away, because my feeling is that they haven't. And then the second is like, this is such an interesting shift in medium. And I think on the publishing side too, how they're thinking of it. And just like the size of the book, right? And what the smaller book, the connotation of that book and how it meant something different in the 70s, 80s, 90s than now. So who wants to start?
I will. So we're talking about the literal page size. So a mass market is a small book. It's like 4.5 inches by 7 inches approximately. And it's generally what you see in like a checkout line at a grocery store. Or maybe at an airport if there's like a book that was really popular and then they've like repackaged it into a smaller book. So we're talking about the literal physical size of a book. A trade paperback is the larger size, but still in paperback. So it's like almost the same size as a hardcover, but it's a paperback. And then obviously I assume you know what a hardcover is. So those are the three categories of books that we're talking about. And when we opened, I would say 100% of historical romance, 100% of paranormal romance, and 50% of contemporary romance were published in mass market paperback first. Generally, we're concerned with like the first thing that they publish, because sometimes if something's popular, they'll like redo it in another size. Now, in 2024, oh my God, I almost forgot what year it was. 90% of historical is in mass market. 20% of paranormal is in mass market, and 0, not really, but like 10% of contemporary is in mass market. So first thing, you're not crazy.
I feel like your number is even low for historicals. I'm looking at 3 historicals in trade on my desk right now.
Okay.
I think that's that.
So let's say we'll make it 80, but it's still that you can find the most mass markets in historical. Okay. Then, so Jennifer's also talking about something called a clinch cover, which is people, like actual models, generally in historical dress, occasionally shirtless, the man, obviously, and, on some sort of windswept, boat or castle or something like that. Yeah, you can picture presumably what I'm talking about.
Yeah, like Fabio, right? Like that's
Yes.
That's the yeah.
Yeah, that is called a clinch cover. Then she's talking about an illustrated cover. Some people call them like a cartoon cover. The point is there's no real people. It's an illustration, sometimes of people, sometimes of not people. And that has exploded in popularity since we've been doing this. From contemporary, like especially there was, I would say, 2% illustrated covers when we started, and now it's like almost 100%.
This is a new Avon.
It's an audio medium, B.
Oh, they're not showing the video. I mean, I'm showing Am. This is crazy. Like, this book would have never come out when we opened in this format.
So it's like it's a trade paperback, and it has
two
an illustration.
ladies. It's a lesbian historical.
Wow. What's the title of it so we can make sure to put this in the show notes? I'm trying to squint at it.
Don't Want You Like a Best Friend. Yes, it is a Taylor reference.
Amazing.
By Emma Albin.
It's so good.
Okay, sorry. I still haven't actually answered the question.
Sorry.
So, okay.
No, yeah.
Now that we've defined all of our terms, where did they go? They went away.
They can charge more for trade.
Oh.
Yeah, they make more money. I would say, and I think Jennifer acknowledges this in her question, like I do think it's probably more fair compensation for the authors that you enjoy. So obviously I totally understand why you want cheaper books, but romance novelists have made pennies for decades. So there is a benefit to hopefully them getting paid a little bit more. But I also think anything to do with covers and format is just cyclical trends. So like, especially with the illustrated covers, everyone's like, oh my God, what's happening? I'm like, this has happened before. This is not where it's not like the apocalypse or anything. Confessions of a Shopaholic.
I was just thinking that.
Early chick lit of like 2000, like that had its own style of illustrated covers that we went through.
Or go back even further. In the 80s, there was a moment where they didn't want clinch covers and there were like diamonds on the cover or like a flower.
Yes, Danielle Steele. Right? Like
perfect example.
Yes.
So there have been these moments.
Yeah. That like Danielle Steele, I was like, oh, this is classy. This is a classy romance with lots of sex that I'm not supposed to read.
Totally. Totally. Like right after 50 Shades, all erotica had
right.
a lily on the cover or like cufflinks or whatever, you know?
Tie.
In the black.
I promise I'm not going to spend the whole time dunking on traditional romance, but traditionally published romance, but they are very susceptible to when they see success of something else, they just want to endlessly do it again. So there's a lot of that. So I just think that the cycles of romance covers are like less a harbinger of anything than people might think, and more just about like what's currently selling and traditional publishing, what they're copying. And then in a couple of years, they'll find something else, and that's what we'll do.
Yeah. So there's another question that we're not going to go into in full, but it's basically pointing out that everything that you just talked about, but then also asking, do you think that there should be things on the cover that somehow communicate the spice level of the book?
I'm not opposed to it, but I think it'd be hard because, you know, you have cross-publisher competition.
Who gets to decide? Is there going to be like an MPAA of like spice levels, right?
I'm a little opposed to it because I think it stems from a very we must protect the children kind of attitude.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is the job of parenting. So, you know, when people are like, oh, like a kid might pick up this book. Well, if they hand it to their parent to buy, the parent should look at the book. Like I don't view that as my job. That's their job.
I mean, our parents let us, we read romance extremely early. Our mother did not. She was not a romance reader. She knew what books we were reading, but she didn't read them. And she let me read them. And obviously it led to where we are now. Like,
I mean, we'll get to this a little later, but the official culture study stance is that you should let your teens read romance to try on and experiment with different ideas about sex. Like, it's way better than not knowing anything about sex.
Yeah, and romance.
Especially good romance, like so much about consent, right?
Exactly. And it centers feelings and a healthy conversation and sex as like something that's beautiful and not to be ashamed. I don't think that's a bad thing to give teens as their introduction to sex.
And if there's a spice level on the cover, like kids are just going to, I don't know, rip off the cover so that their parents won't see the spice level. Of course.
Right? Like they'll always find it.
And it's just like something that's really sexy to someone is like pretty tame to somebody else. Like, who would decide that?
Well, and you also get into this scenario where probably someone like where sex that isn't heterosexual vanilla sex somehow becomes spicier, right? And with that, like,
of course, you're teetering on the edge of homophobia, teetering on the edge of patriarchal. Let's not judge different kinds of sex.
That's what the back of the book is for. It tells you what the book is about. So, like, yeah, if you don't read that and you just look at the cover, like, yeah, you might end up with something that you're not expecting, but you should read the back of the book.
Right. And that's what friends are for, is to be like, this one was spicy. Like, you can pick up the signals that other people are putting down.
I was like the romance dealer of my high school and middle school and high school. I would come to school with a backpack full of these books. Specifically, I was really into historicals. They were all historical. And like hand them out to my friends. Like I had like a little illicit.
For readers that will get a kick out of this, can you say like the historicals that were your favorite?
Oh my gosh. Like at that point, it was definitely Lisa Kleypas, Sarah McLean, of course, Julia Quinn, the early Bridgertons. I loved Lorraine Heath. She was like one of my faves. Loretta Chase. Oh my God. So good.
We talked about this the last romance podcast we did, but I was very into like the Imzadi romance line of Star Trek The Next Generation. Basically, it was Star Trek The Next Generation books that are about Riker and Troy and their forever love. So I didn't realize how much I loved romance. I was like, I just like these Star Trek books. No, I like
that's so funny.
That's we know a number of women who have entered the romance space through like more geek world nerddom spaces. There's such an overlap there. And I'm so glad that we're like now embracing that instead of like, no, it's just sci-fi. No, it's just romance. Like now there are sci-fi romance.
Well, and I remember this conversation around Outlander too, in terms of like the author was so firm about this is not romance. And I'm like, bitch, this is romance. Like there's time travel and there is a lot of romance. Like it's amazing. Who cares?
Right. Who cares? You're getting all these readers. What do you care that they think it's romance? I think what she was trying to do there is she was trying to set preparation of expectations because those books don't always end happily. So she was like, please don't come to my books for a happy ending.
Right.
She also, said some other stuff. But
that's a very charitable way to look at it.
Yeah, there were other things said, but I do think that is a valid point, which is that some historical fiction does not end happily, and so therefore would not be classified as romance.
Yes. Okay, our next question comes from Chi, who wants to know how word about romance novels gets around.
What are the ways that people are finding their next romance read? How and why do some books blow up and become so ubiquitous and well-known?
Well, I think there's another question at some point about book talk as well. Social media is a huge driver of young female readership in so many different ways.
Yeah.
They talk about the books, they share the books, they share going to the bookstore, they share their book club. It's like the act of reading is shared in this very lovely communal way on social media.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
it's like, some books start getting talked about and it's very much like a Rolling Stone, you can't stop, which is good for that book. It just means that other books do get overlooked.
Yeah.
And we always try to strike a balance in our bookstore of highlighting the books that are super popular right now and then also highlighting as many as we can that we think should be super popular for any number of reasons. And our staff is so amazing about that too, because they read everything.
Leah, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bee's story is a really good example. Like we're millennials, so we're like just a little bit pre-social media. So, there's a direct line from her handing out books from her backpack at school to people that she actually knows in real life to, a young person on TikTok who is essentially doing the same thing,
right.
Just to people in other countries and states.
Right.
Algorithms are racist. I'm not a computer scientist, but I believe computer scientists when they tell me why algorithms are racist. So they're not 100% evil, but it's just important to recognize that and recognize that that is what contributes to certain books becoming really popular.
Yeah.
Again, it's not like fully positive, fully negative. It's just like important to keep in mind. So, but especially in romance, the way that people learn about new romance is from other romance readers. And that can take different forms depending on your preferred podcast, Twitter feed, in-person book club, library, whatever, but it is generally from other romance readers.
Yeah. The one thing I think about is how easy it is for a book that features, let's say, a straight protagonist, straight, white, slender, able-bodied protagonist, because white women still make up the majority of readers broadly, just because of percentages like racial breakdown in the United States, let's say, something resonates more because of that easy identification, that kind of base level identification. And then it becomes like you said, it becomes this entity that eclipses other entities.
That exact phenomena has been so problematic in romance because books about aliens blow up.
Yeah.
Books about all kinds of crazy shit blow up, but it doesn't seem like as much we're getting books blown up about Black characters, Mexican characters. There is a racism, like Leah said, inherent in the algorithm when it comes to promoting that stuff. And then also what's being published, the numbers are still not equitable. There's issues still here. Leah has mentioned this before. There's so much self-published romance. And in self-published romance, you can find so much more representation of everything. And I'm interested to see when those really do start grabbing hold of social media, because they have banana pants plots too, and all the kinds of things that people seem to love in straight white romances.
Right. Yeah. And some of it is just like, because I don't think readers are necessarily explicitly like, I only want to read about white protagonists. It's more that like, this is just what gets popular and what spreads and eclipses the other books.
It requires some investment in being a reader who's seeking out a wide variety of stories, whatever that might be, or being a more passive reader who's just reading what's popular, and what is popular is going to be white and straight usually.
Melody just put a giant copy paste into our show notes that says, ask them about the state of racial diversity in romance publishing report, which you did almost immediately after opening, right?
Yeah.
Why did that feel important? Tell me about that.
You can go on our website, throughtbodice.com, and click on where it says, we may have chosen too long of a name, but whatever, the State of Racial Diversity in Romance Publishing Report.
It's a long name.
So
once an academic, always an academic. I mean, there's no colon. So
that's what it is.
There's no colon, so you're okay.
No, that's what it is. And it's very simple. We try to be really clear about what it is. It's not like some comprehensive giant project. What it is a data track of how many authors who are not white, the 20 largest romance publishers, are publishing every year.
Yeah.
So each publisher gets a percentage number. So let's say ABC publisher puts out 100 books a year. 9 of them are written by authors of color. So their percentage for the year is 9. We're not looking at any content. It's solely about the authors. And this is not self-publishing. This is traditional and indie publishing, the 20 largest companies. And because we started this in 2016 and we do it every year, you can see how those numbers change over the years. And the reason that we started doing this is I am a fan of hard data. And we felt like there was amazing advocacy being done by readers and in particular authors for decades. However, the thing that they were, and we were still hearing from publishers was, number one, we're working on it. And number two, we're getting better. And I am the kind of person who I'm like, okay, prove it. And if you can't prove it, I'm going to prove that you're lying. And, in my opinion, I did prove that they were lying.
Or at least willfully sticking their heads in the sand.
Sure. And really, misrepresenting themselves. Yeah. And if we've achieved nothing else, like we don't publish the books, we can't do anything about that. But I do think we have made it so that, if a publisher says we've gotten better and your percentage has gone down over the last 6 years, there's a lot of people who can now say, okay, well, you're straight up lying. Yeah. And we really view it as a tool to just support the authors who have been doing this work for decades. And hopefully it just gives them another tool in their arsenal, especially because I think when we started, honestly, the conversation was still, and this was after, again, decades, like this isn't as big of a problem as you're making it seem. And so hopefully we've given authors this tool to be able to say, okay, do you really think 3% of your books being written by authors of color is acceptable? And obviously, yes, there are a lot of people who do think that that's acceptable. But hopefully we've just given people a tool to be able to talk about this with more accuracy.
I think a big thing for us was just, it is not a meritocracy.
Yep.
And we had to start from like a place of all realizing it's not write the best book, you're going to get published. That is not what's going on here. And if we made a decision as booksellers to be activist booksellers to actively try and fight against white supremacy in publishing. And that happens in a number of ways. But in this way, it was just like, the simplest data, just the single number of how much you are publishing is one small part of this much larger conversation that we all need to be involved in. But it's just what we felt we could add to the conversation.
Yep.
Yeah. 2 phrases I would encourage people to look out for that, and this goes back to our previous question before, exactly what Bea is saying, like, oh, I don't care about the author, I just want the best book.
Yeah. Well,
look out for that. And then look out for, oh, I just prefer books that I can relate to.
ugh.
I think there are people that would say that there's nothing wrong with either of those statements. But I want people to be on the lookout for those and especially in themselves.
Yep.
And start to interrogate what's underneath that.
Yep.
Especially the one that's like, I don't care about the author, I just want the best book. Dig a little bit deeper in terms of who has access to resources in publishing. And I think you might find that your bookshelf broadens a little bit.
Okay, so this is from an author themselves. Let's hear from Andy.
I am selfishly wondering what bookstore owners wish authors knew about book selling or what they misunderstand. And how can authors be dream allies for indie bookstores beyond the obvious, linking to them and not Amazon, etc.? I'd love specifics. Should we call before we stop in to sign copies? Not bother introducing ourselves if the store is busy? Is it good or bad to bring bookmarks to tuck inside our titles, etc.? Thank you.
Okay, best practices for relationship between author and bookseller.
That's such a nice question.
I know, right?
Can I take this one, Bea?
Yes, of course.
All right, you're already way better than most other people. I'm not kidding. And obviously nobody sets out to be like annoying or anything, but so great job, Andy. What Andy clearly recognizes that I think obviously sometimes people have a hard time with is like, you have poured your heart and soul into your book, your career, to your friends, family, readers, like you are the most special and amazing jewel.
Yes.
We probably carry 2,000 individual authors. So I just think starting from a place of, I am a tiny grain of sand in a large beach. It helps you sort of contextualize things. The first thing that Andy said is a great best practice in terms of the first thing we're going to do if we don't know, if we've never heard of your work before, is go to your website. And if all of your links go to Amazon and you don't have an indie bookstore listed and you're like, oh, I want to work with indie bookstores, the first thing you can do doesn't require our participation at all. So that's not to say we're never going to talk to you if you don't list a bookstore, but it is just a great signal to us that you're you've paid attention to this. And obviously most people, you link to Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes and Noble, and then you say oh, this is my hometown indie or something. It's not, you can't link to Amazon. To answer her actual questions, yes, please let us know if you're coming to our bookstore, especially if you want to sign books, because we will order extras. Depending on how popular you are, just to be frank, we might have 20 copies of your book in the store. We might have 2. So if we know that you're coming, we might order a couple extra so that we have more. Introduce yourself. I do actually think it kind of depends on if the store is busy or not. It also depends on...
The big thing I would say to that is...
Go ahead.
At another author's event is not the time to introduce yourself. Oh, yeah. That's just a big one I've noticed. And I totally understand because authors are friends and they come to each other's events. We are busy working on another event, and it's not nice to your friend. It's not nice to anyone to pull focus that, and it can just put everyone in an awkward.
I think depending on what your goal, if you want to come into the store and just have a great time and take a picture of your book on the shelf, fantastic. But if you are hoping to talk to somebody who works there, like specifically choose a good time for that, which is like, you know, a weekday at noon as opposed to like Saturday at 3, which is, you know, obviously the busiest time. As a general matter, and this just applies to everybody, the best thing that you can do is respect a bookstore's rules or processes that they already have in place. And not everybody has this, but we do. We have information on our website about how to send us your book, especially if you're self-published. So don't mail us a copy of your book. Like, we have a process for that. You're wasting money. And then, you know, I think this is, I think, hard for some authors because obviously it's really hard to get published. And a lot of times you have to scrape for years and really believe in yourself. But when it comes to, you know, somebody else's business, you do have to be able to accept no as an answer. You know, we can't respond to every single person who submits a book. And you will start to annoy us if you send us 12 emails.
And we're also never saying no to be mean. It's never from a place of like, there's so many factors for hosting an event. There's so many factors for having your book in the store. There's so many factors for all these little things that, sometimes it doesn't work out. And respecting no is like the single best way to show us that we might want to work with you in the future.
The best thing for authors, and especially romance authors, I think this has gotten better over the years, but this is a business. It is always a business. I understand your book is so personal to you, but you are a business as an author and we are a business. And I do think sometimes there's like this sort of altruistic bent to conversations about romance that's like, oh, it's for women and we should all just be friends and be happy to be here. We are in the business of making money. Like, yeah, we care about other things, but I like to remind people, like, this is a for-profit business.
Right.
So the decisions that we make are in service of that, including, by the way, what we were just talking about with the diversity reports. It is a tool that we are using to try to make more money. Because we think that if there were more books by authors of color, we would make money on them.
And make those authors more.
Right, right.
There's more money to be made in this genre, and it's being left on the table because of racism.
Yeah. And I'll just say...
this has been the long history of capitalism. Yeah. Right? It's like, why...
Capitalism and racism go hand in hand.
And like fat phobia and patriarchy, like all these things. It's like, why is capitalism like so narrow-minded in who it thinks is its customer?
Last thing, and then I promise I'll stop. The number one reason that we reject books to carry in the store is their cover. I know this sounds really dumb, but you would be surprised. Your book needs to look like a book. Yeah. So if you put your book next to a bunch of other popular books and yours looks like it was created in clip art for a 5th grade presentation about volcanoes, you have a problem.
Yeah.
And there's so many amazing resources now for authors to get great covers made. So there's really no excuse for it anymore.
Yeah. It's not like you have to be very into personal design yourself or like have a brother who knows how to use like Photoshop. Like, there are so many resources.
But last thing, your book has to be able to sell itself off the shelf without us doing anything. Yeah. Just to wrap it up and make it sound nice, you're doing great. Good job. And
thank you for asking. Thank you for asking the question.
Yeah.
Okay, so this last question before we get to the more advicey stuff is from Marissa, and it's about how you stock your store, especially I think the used stuff. I'm really interested into this. So let's hear it.
Romance is a genre with so much history and so many eras. Not just those depicted in historical romance, but eras in the industry itself. I would love to know more about how buyers approach balancing current titles, authors, and trends with older ones. Especially the bonkers 80s books that were so formative to my young romance-sneaking self, but in retrospect are extremely problematic. How does a romance-centric bookstore thread the needle of celebrating the genre and reckoning with its past?
Who wants to take this one?
The history of romance is my
this is all
my area of expertise. Oh my God, I literally have so many thoughts. I don't even know where to start. But the history of romance has a variety of problematic things in it. In the books, in the authors, like there's things that have happened. And we don't promote those titles as like new books that you should be reading right now because they're full of consent and healthy all the things we've been talking about as something we like to see in romance. That is just not where people were writing from in the 80s. It's a very different vibe. There certainly are healthier romances from the 80s, by the way. And there's also quite a few Black and women of color writing romance historically as well, who have kind of been written out of the narrative for any number of reasons. But we have that stuff because it is a part of our history. We're not trying to pretend like it didn't happen. I think acting like it had no problematic moments, acting like rape as the start of a relationship is like a good thing we're not doing that. But it is in early romance. And we are a romance bookstore, and we like to know where we've come from, almost in excitement of where we have ended up. And we also, there's another part of this, which is one of my particular pet projects, is romance as rare books has not traditionally been given any value. Shocker. Yeah. I know. I am obsessed with promoting romance novels as rare collectible books. There are a number of people who are collecting romance and who are literally like winning awards for it, who are writing about it in a very academic way. Rebecca Romney, she's been a rare bookseller for years who has been promoting romance and women authors in the early 18th centuries. Like she's just been doing amazing work. She has a book coming out about being an Austen fan and reading the authors that Austen read and like learning about who she loved. And it's just such a cool project. Georgette Hare, Mary Burchell, there are authors who people are collecting already. Some Georgette Hare, like very problematic, but her books have value on the rare books market. And I think that is a big part of continuing to get people to respect romance, respect where we came from, respect this genre and women as creators, people who should be collected. So we have a small selection online right now of used books. They go pretty fast because people get excited by the covers. And
we update it every week. We put new books up every week. So if that's something you're interested in, check back and see what's new.
I've always wanted to do an entire catalog of rare romance.
Yeah, no, I collect old fan magazines and scandal magazines. And so I absolutely know how difficult it is to find historical archival copies. I mean, I love eBay. It's fantastic for it. And they are incredible repositories of cultural knowledge. You're like, oh, what were we thinking about? What words did we use to describe like what was going on with sex at this time? It's all there.
My favorite thing, old romance novels have old advertisements in them.
Yes.
Amazing. They're so
amazing.
Fascinating. Like cruises and perfumes and purses and like you just learn so much. Also, this is like totally an insight into my brain. My favorite thing in a romance is to find, someone's hated this book.
Yes.
Like their little notation.
In their like grandma script, like just like
too sexy. Or, it just to connect with a past reader of romance like that is like so meaningful to me. When we first opened, someone came in and gave us her mom's Harlequin catalog, which was this thing that they published that had every book they'd published for years. And she had been checking off every single one she'd read. It's still one of my most prized possessions. I feel like I can see it like literally on my shelf over there. Because it just like, it's this guide into another romance reader from another generation. I think it's the coolest thing.
The checklist. So just good. I love it.
Can I tell you one of my most cherished possessions? I'm a huge Nora Roberts fan, and I have a massive Nora Roberts collection. And I mean, this just speaks to our customers. One of my all-time favorite customers, her name is Jen. Huge shout out, Jen.
Love you, Jen.
At this year's LA Times Festival of Books, she handed me like a beautifully wrapped package, a gift. And I opened it, and it was a promotional Nora Roberts tissue box that's like... that she put in like a acrylic thing to like keep it nice. And it's like, basically it's like, her next book will make you cry. Like, here are some tissues for that. And first of all, like, just, I mean, the fact that she like got this for me is
Genius
just
marketing.
so lovely and kind. Incredible marketing. And it's on my dresser. So yeah, and I think we put it very, very well. It's, you know, yes, primarily what we sell is books published in the last 10 to 15 years. I have interesting conversations with people, you know, especially when we're talking about like if we're selling them a Nice Nin or the Anne Rice Sleeping Beauty series. I will usually say to people like, this is an interesting academic exercise. Like, I want you to understand,
right,
you know, what you're going into.
Right.
Or if people come in and are really interested in the genre and are looking to get more into that history, you know, we will say, you know, like The Flame and the Flower is really important to the genre. Is it by 2024 standards a good romance novel? No. So it's,
but that doesn't mean that it's not like foundational, right?
It's
you know,
just
like,
about it's B, as B said, one of our favorite phrases that we stole from our sister-in-law Olivia: preparation of expectations.
All right, so this part of Advice Time is going to be for paid subscribers. We're so excited for it. And if you're not a paid subscriber, you won't get to hear all of our advice on being a good book recommender and how and whether to facilitate tween and teen girls' relationship to romance novels. So if you want this part of the show, you know where to go. If people want to find more, where can they find you? What are your favorite ways for them to find you on the internet?
We are the Rick Bodice pretty much everywhere: Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, our website. Depending on how you enjoy, you know, interacting with things, choose your medium. If you want silly videos, go to TikTok. If you like, you know, seeing what all the new releases are that week, go to Instagram. And then obviously if you live in California or New York, or you're passing through, please come visit us in person.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been a delight.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise that you don't want to miss any of them. I know that I say that every time, but it's really true. We have so many good episodes in the works. Some of the shows we're working on include how we think and talk about cancer, and how and where we consume celebrity gossip, which is really the whole range of this podcast in a nutshell. Melody wrote this before she knew what today's newsletter was going to be, but it's about Kate Middleton's post-chemotherapy video. So it really is the whole spread of everything that we grapple with at Culture Study. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only Advice Time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod or check the show notes for a link. And if you want to support the show and get bonus content, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you will get ad-free episodes, the exclusive Advice Time segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that all of your questions go to the front of the line. You also get a discount if you're already a subscriber to the Culture Study newsletter. So look in your inbox for that promo code, and it'll lead you there. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.